Okay, so today's video is actually going to be about the major events that has actually occurred in the past few decades, and one of those events have been really a spectacle for the audience. And these events were so much crucial that because of these events there has been many more incidents that occurred and that shaped the world in which we are living right now. So one of the few ones is actually we humans actually going to the moon landing, and then there is the JFK assassination, and then there's the third one, which is actually 9/11. All these three incidents have something really special in themselves, and we're going to discover what that special thing is. What's that one common thing which is similar in these three incidents? Of course, there are many things that are similar into this, but I'm going to talk about the few of the main things that are really important to know. So this is first we are going to talk about moon landing. So it took years to come to the point of being able to reach moon, and it took almost 4,000 people to actually make this happen. So 4,000 people were actually working on this, and it took maybe 12 to 13 years to make this actually happen. So it happened around 1960. It started between 1962 and in 1973 we actually went to the moon, and that's how it happened. So it took 4,000 people to actually reach there, and three of the people were actually landed on the moon. So it was actually it was made it was happened it was made possible by the Americans. And then there's the second surprise, which is even more surprising, which actually creates some sort of doubt, and which actually tells us what sort of technology people were using at that time, and which is President Nixon had a telephone conversation with astronauts when they actually landed on the moon. And that creates a sort of a question for the people, that how was it possible for a president, for a person to talk to those people over a telephone? Maybe it could be said that it was made possible somehow by connecting the telephone technology with the telecommunication sector, that was actually making it possible to talk to the astronauts in the NASA. But still, if it was really that much easier, and it was, even if it was difficult to make it done, still they made it possible. And now why is it still not so much possible to do it again? So that creates some sort of questions. And then there's the third thing, which is Apollo 11 astronauts were questioned about how they saw stars, and if they did see them on the moon. So people at that time were questioning these astronauts when they actually came back from the moon. So the professor actually gives an example about this thing, that if these people really went to the moon, then when they came back to the earth, why is it that everybody was questioning them about they going to moon? Why is it that people were not so much happy? People were happy, but not everybody was seeming to be looking to be happy, and that's creates a sort of question again. And that's what we have to really focus on. So even at that time when they came back from the moon, people were still questioning these sort of things, and it's surprising. And there were major committees that actually held these people into custodies by that I mean investigations, and they were questioning these beings, that did they see stars when they were on the moon, or the surface was rigid or not. So they were questioning these sort of things. And then there's going to be the next thing, that when they actually landed over the moon, it takes a huge burst to actually make the rocket fly out of the earth, and then to reach the moon it needs some specific coordinations, route, and that's how it is actually going to land on a specific place on the moon. And think about it, there would be so many obstacles, there would be so many things that it would have to go through, and then to land on the moon, it would be another sort of miracle. And then when they actually landed, it was in a rocket. Its full structure was in a full rocket. When it actually bursted from the earth, and then when it actually landed on the moon, it had been left with just a small piece of that rocket. So it was a really small spaceship, and then to make that spaceship come back to the earth is just like unimaginable. So there seems to be no resistance, and they were singing songs, Neil Armstrong. There's a video of it, and the video looks pretty much fake, but they still released this. And the question raises up, if there are too many doubts, why is this still available for people to see it? If it creates doubts, why is it available for people to see it? And that's something we are going to question today. We're going to question the questions. And then there's the 9/11 incident. So there were 3 buildings that came down that day. The Twin Towers, the North Tower, the South Tower, and then there was the 6th or 7th number building which was across the street, and that came down too. And these buildings came down not because the plane was actually hit into them, but because they collapsed. It was as if it was a demolition. It was as if something bursted inside those buildings, which actually made them collapse. So why is it that the 3rd building also came down? That's something to question too. So, and there was one more person that professor was speaking about. I can't really recall what his name was, but it is said to be that he benefited the most from it, and it was he had some sort of deals with the insurance companies, and because of those things he actually profited a lot of billions of dollars. Maybe it was because it was his buildings or some sort of related to that, and he actually sued the insurance companies, and then he was actually given that amount. So he's considered to be one of the most dumbest, that's the word professor said, dumbest and luckiest person in the world. And professor says that you don't really have to be smart, you just have to be lucky. So as I said, it was the North Tower, the South Tower, and the building number 7, which was across the street, and nothing hit that building, and it still came down. During the attack, the president was in a class, watching kids being taught in class, and even after knowing that the buildings are actually in attack, the president did not even move from that place. He was still watching the children. He got news, somebody came and said in his ear that, oh, president, we got an attack, and he was calmed down, and the reporter asked him, what is your reaction to this? And he said, we will talk about it later. So the question is not that if he was in panic or not, the question is why he was not escorted to a safe place. If it was that much of an attack, it could be said that the president's life could have been in danger too, but he wasn't even in any shock. He was calm. His name was Kennedy, maybe. So understanding JFK assassination. In 1963, he was assassinated. In an investigation, it was found that only one person was actually responsible for this, and his name was Lee Harvey Oswald. And the president was actually shot 3 times, and it is said that the place where he was shot is called Ala Plaza or something like that, and when he was shot, the bullet that was used was a magic bullet. And when it happened, one of the major colonel was actually shot in that incident, and his brother then afterwards also got killed. That's also to be considered. And that Allah Plaza is actually has a lot of resemblance to the Jewish uh, temple candle that they use in their holy churches, which has like 12 sort of towers, or um, 12 towers, right? You can call it 12. Um, it is like in this shape, like fingers, 12 fingers. And then it is also said that that place had a lot of buildings around inside it. And what happened is that was also the first place for the Freemasons to actually. It was also a site for the first Freemasons' large temple in Texas. It was Allah Plaza. His brother got killed too when he ran for the elections, and and there was another person who was actually charged for that, for his assassination, and he got killed too. His attempted murderer. What happened is he was also he was assassinated by somebody, and the police who was surrounded him was not even in a shock. They were in a shock, but they did not really try to protect him. After the crash, I'll say one more thing about 9/11. Its debris, its infrastructure, was actually shipped to China just after a month. So there was no investigation that was actually held for the 9/11. And hijackers' passports were actually found. So it is said that when the building was actually hit by the plane, the answer and the details that were given by the investigation team, that how did the buildings actually collapsed, was that for some sort of method, when plane actually hit in the buildings, what happened is all those buildings started to melt one by one, those floors, and then it somehow collapsed one after another. That's why we see that collapse, but never in the history it has happened anywhere in history or after that event. So that's surprising too, that it only happened one time. Why are there so much evidences and still people are not protesting and believing in the government? So one of the few things to really consider here is that to not doubt in the conspiracies is to say that the government does not lie to us. It always speaks the truth. Or why would government would have to do something such as that? That's also something to really consider. And then for 9/11, what could be said is that we went to the moon, but we failed, Americans failed, and then they had to make up a story. They had to release these footages so they can make people believe in this, so people will not be grieving over this. And then there is something to do, like if they would send the people over to the moon, then the people might actually get killed, and then what would happen is people would also be in a shock, and America's picture, America's imagination in the minds of people would actually shatter. That's also one of the explanations that could be given here. And then there is also that Soviet Unions were actually going to the space years before America did, and to make America great again, they had to do something such as this. They had to do something new. So that's also one of the reasons why they were doing this. And there's one thing that actually creates more doubts in people's mind, is that there's something called Van Allen belts, which is electromagnetic fields, which protects us from cosmic radiation. It has heavy radiations, and if you go into it, if somebody comes into this, it would get heated or burned. So it stops steroids, any sort of things which actually hurt us. And then there is also, so how is it possible that we actually left the earth radiation. So there's this method, revelation of method. So they released these things because they wanted to create learned helplessness. What is that? It is that people would get to know these things, but they would not be able to do something about it. Make people like they're helpless. Even after knowing the truth, they cannot do something about it because they lack the 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 mm, actual confrontation. They can't confront these people. That's why they can't really change these people, to make people feel like they can't change the system. And then there is karmic responsibility. By karmic responsibility, it means that to make people a part of their own, part of their plans. So if people would not be doing something about it by the first thing, then the responsibility would also be burdened, taken on the shoulders of the people, of the ordinary people. Because if they're not doing something about it, then what does it mean? It means that they are also a part of the plan. And if they would go to the god, then they would be also taken held for that they did not do something about it. And that's it. And then there's attention capture. What happens is, when these sort of incidents actually occur, what happens is it leaves a sort of shock, spectacle, and such a wonder on people's mind that they cannot forget these moments. It's like it always gets to be inscribed into people's minds, so it shakes them. And one of the most important factors to really think that why America did this is actually because at that time, in 1960 to 1973, what happened is there were a lot of things happening in the US, which actually affected USA's popularity and USA's image in front of people, which was actually America's people got killed, president got killed, and there was hunger, its economy was being shattered, and then there were so many things going on. I forgot. And then he also introduces the concept of Freemasons, and he introduces bureaucracy, and then he also talks about the numbers of 33, which actually has a lot of importance in the mythology of Freemasons. He talks about it in a way that the number 3, Christian died. Jesus died when he was 33 years old. King Solomon reigned for 33 years. Triangle has 3 sides, and all these incidents which actually occurred on the numerology number 3. So if you add them up, 9 is divided on 3, and 19, it happened on 1963, right? So if you add those things up, it's again 33. And what else? And then he talks about the equator, the map, the geological level of 33 degree, which is neither too hot, neither too cold. And he says that if you go north at the 33 degree angle, what would you see is you would see a lot of great nations which have historical importances, significance: Damascus, Baghdad, Iraq, Mesopotamia, Euphrates, Tigris, and all these states. And then if you go to the south, you would see that there's Japan, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, which were actually bombed, and it is also at a 33 degree. And then if you go to the north, we have Dallas, which is actually one of the main cities for Freemasons, I say. And then there's another state, I forgot the name of it, and from that place, what happened is detonated the nuclear bomb. The first nuclear bomb was actually detonated. So all these things happened by the people who were actually Freemasons, and that's not a conspiracy. It's actually something that could have a lot of questions that could not be answered in right way. So It is really interesting what has actually happened, and I hope I have summarized everything. There's still a lot of things I can talk about, but I would just have to ponder a little bit, and then I would have to speak about it. Thanks so much for listening to this.